Hello and welcome back. In this episode, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different to my normal stuff, as I've been trying to develop a set of flat 2D dungeon tiles that can be used to generate random dungeons. You know, maybe for solo or cooperative style games. Obviously, they don't have to be used for that kind of thing, but that's the main idea behind them. And as you can see from some of the pictures from one of my test games, I'm actually working on a set of tables, cards and tokens to go along with them. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the description to a blog post where I run through several rounds of exploration. Just keep in mind that nothing's finalised, and it's all just placeholder art on the cards and tokens at the moment. Anyway, in this video, I'll be making the tiles and the doors themselves. So yeah, let's get started on those. Okay then, so for these, I'm going to try a slightly different assembly method. So I've kinda done the unthinkable, and I've actually bought some cardboard. The first of which is some 1mm thick grey board, or chipboard I think it's called in the US, and I've also bought some that's 2mm thick. I'll put a few Amazon links in the description so you can see the kind of thing that I mean. Anyway, for the tiles themselves, we'll be using the thicker of the two. And again, just to show a different assembly method, rather than printing on regular paper and gluing that to the card, to speed things up, I've printed the textures onto some sticky back label paper. So all I need to do is apply that to the card, make sure it's stuck down nice and flat, and then start cutting that to size using a sharp knife and a metal ruler. Though it is worth pointing out that it is a bit more difficult to cut through, but you could just as easily use foam core or corrugated card. As I keep saying, this really is just to illustrate that there's lots of different materials that you can use for this kind of thing. And here's the finished tile, and I have to admit that using this thick card, it does make it feel like a proper board game component. Anyway, we can then do the same thing for all of the passage tiles, and like I mentioned at the start of the video, these have been designed to work in conjunction with the random dungeon system that I've been working on, so the kind of layouts that can be made, they are somewhat limited, but that's by design, as unlike the 2.5D tiles, I am making these for a very specific purpose. The two aren't really interchangeable. If you check out the blog post that I mentioned earlier, it'll probably make a bit more sense. But yeah, that's the tiles done. Okay then, for the doors, we'll take two of these textures, and we're going to be sticking those to some of the 1mm thick cardboard, which is what you can see me doing here. And to minimise waste, I like to stick them down so that they kind of overlap each other, if that makes sense. Basically, something like that. Then it's just a matter of cutting those out, and the straight parts are easy enough to do. We can do that just using a sharp knife and a metal ruler again. It's fairly straightforward stuff, though cutting out the arches does take a bit more time and a bit more care. You could probably use a pair of scissors with this thinner card, but as you can see, I've stuck with the knife. And there you go. There's the first one done. And we'll just need to do the exact same thing with the other one as well. Okay, next we'll take an offcut piece of the 2mm thick card, and onto that we're going to stick the two spacer pieces. And then cut those to size. Now, I'm not sure if it makes much difference at all, but in this example, I decided to peel the paper off these, just so that when I glue it all together, the glue bonds to the card itself, not the sticky back paper. And speaking of glue, I'm going to be using a bit of PVA for this next part. And all we'll need to do is apply some glue to one of the spacers, and stick that to the back of one of the archways, in the position that you can see here. Then we'll do the same thing with the other spacer on the other side, making sure that both of these are flush with the edges of the archway piece itself, so that, when we're done, we end up with something that looks like this. Okay, all we'll need to do then is apply some more glue to the other side of both spacer pieces, and then stick the other side of the archway into place. And with any luck, this should be the kind of thing that we're left with. An open doorway with a 2mm wide opening on top, where we can slide in a little door piece later on. Though I am going to rest something heavy on top of this, just to make sure that it stays stuck together while it dries. Okay, so while that's drying, we can move on to the door itself. And for this, we'll take some of the thinner 1mm card again, and we'll stick one of the door textures on top of that, like you can see here. And then simply cut that to size. there you go. Then we'll cut out another doorway exactly to size and carefully stick that to the back, making sure that it's nicely aligned. And with any luck, that should result in something like this. So yeah, that's the door done. Right then, so by now, the first piece should have dried, but it still needs a base. And to make one, I'm going to be using some of that clear plastic material that miniatures sometimes come packaged in. And it's a bit hard to see, but we'll need to cut that out so it's the size that you can see here on the screen, or thereabout. Then what I like to do is mark a couple of lines along the centre of the piece, and a couple more to represent the width of the archway itself, just to give me a rough idea of where to place the glue. Then I'll flip it over so that the markings are now on the underside, and then I'm just going to dab a couple of spots of super glue into the areas that I just marked out, so that I can then glue the sides of the arch into place. And because the markings are on the bottom of the base, I can just rub them away easily enough, so that when we're done, this is the final result. And if I just grab the door itself, that can then be slotted into place to represent a closed doorway, and when it's opened, we can simply remove it again, leaving the open door frame on the table. And then it's just a matter of making as many of these as you like. And I think that's it for this episode. As I say, this really is just the beginning of another little side project of mine, this random dungeon thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but I thought it was worth sharing nonetheless, as I think it makes for a nice little tile set in its own right. Plus, it also gives me the chance to ask everyone if they actually play any kind of solo dungeon crawlers, and if you're interested in seeing me develop the idea further. Though, if I do that, I do just want to be clear that the aim isn't to make an actual game or anything like that. It's just meant to be a simple system that could be inserted into an existing rule set, be it an RPG or a dungeon crawling board game or whatever, just to help with the dungeon exploration part of that particular game, if that makes sense. If you check the blog post that I keep mentioning, that will hopefully clear things up a bit. But yeah, as always, thank you very much for watching. I'd also like to say thanks to everyone that supports the channel, be it via Patreon or YouTube memberships, paying a small amount for the PDFs, or, just watching until the end. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.